Well, welcome everybody to Iowa Ideas. Our session today is on the future of renewable energy in Iowa. Um, and I want to thank our sponsors first. ITC Midwest has been a longtime sponsor of Iowa Ideas, a presenting sponsor. And if you don't know who they are, they're based in Cedar Rapids, and they are responsible for maintaining the infrastructure of the electrical grid in our area. And I thank them very much for their sponsorship of Iowa Ideas. This is now our ninth year of Iowa Ideas, and glad to have everybody here. Let me introduce our panelists who are here to talk with us about this topic today. And let me start with Waylon Brown. He's the regional policy manager for the Clean Grid Alliance, where he leads collaboration with legislative and executive branch leadership, regulators, and trade associations. He spent 7 years in the Iowa Senate, where he led the Commerce Committee, which oversees the state energy policy. Welcome, Waylon. We also have Nick Hyla, who is the executive director of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. Joining us from Wisconsin, my home state of Wisconsin, go Packers, where he works in partnership with organizations throughout the Midwest to advance solar energy education and market development. And he has also led about a half a dozen U.S. Energy Department assistance agreements to support solar workforce development. Welcome to the panel, Nick. And we also have Steve Geyer. He is the Energy Policy Counsel for the Iowa Environmental Council. He also owns a solar installation company in Altoona that has designed and installed solar systems, including in the federal courthouse here in Cedar Rapids, where I am. And he's held key environmental positions at utilities, analyzing environmental laws. So thank you all for joining us today. We're talking about the future of renewable energy growth in Iowa and the challenges that lie ahead of us. But let's start first with kind of benchmarking where we are with renewable energy in Iowa. Iowa has long been a national leader. I'm going to ask Steve to just kind of benchmark what we've seen in the last couple of years about the growth and where we stand right now, and what Iowa should feel proud about.
Yeah, so thanks, Craig. I'll start by saying that clearly we are going through a transition, and we'll continue that. But let's go back in time. Let's go back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Iowa was a state, like many states, that all we had was either coal generation, some gas generation, some nuclear. If we look at the plants that we still have operating in Iowa, in fact, all of our existing coal plants that are still operating were built in the 70s and early 80s. The nuclear plant that may come back online was also built in the 70s. And then it was sort of bolstered with peaking plants that were either natural gas or oil fired. Now let's move forward in time. And so where are we today, and sort of when did we start to change? So right around, I'll just say 2000. Is when there was interest starting to look at, is there the possibility of, in fact, having wind as a possible way to generate electricity? The first wind resources we had were in basically early 2000s. I'll just say largely facilitated by a change in legislation, where we went from a state that had to demonstrate a need to actually build something to a state that said, well, let's view that need as not only meeting our own internal needs, but the ability to sell to other states. And so that sort of facilitated the need to, and the ability to then expand. That largely is why we have seen a very rapid growth in wind. We're starting to see solar come online also. So let's benchmark the point in time where we really started to see Iowa's predominance. And so coal was the predominant way we had. In 2019 is the crossover point where we started generating more wind than actually we were generating from coal. And we continue that path where as of 2024, 67% of our energy either came from wind and or some from solar. So that transition has I'll just say certainly since 2000 made market improvement, market progress. And so, yes, here today we are to discuss what is the future of renewable.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when we talk about renewable energy in Iowa, we're talking mostly wind power, wind energy, with a second, by far, second solar energy. And we do have a few hydroelectric systems, but not very many. I mean, we're not the Niagara Falls of the Midwest. But that's probably what we're talking about. Renewable energy is wind and solar. Is that right?
That is right. And so if we take a look at, for instance, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So as we model and look for what do we need to sort of balance the overall system, we have become a very wind-heavy state. And so as the modeling is starting to show, we need to balance that out. If we take a look at Mid-American's recently approved 800 megawatts of solar, that is one of the things we're seeing is now we need a solar to sort of balance out that wind. Wind is a very good producer in the winter. Solar is very good in the summer, and so they complement each other. So although we will still see more wind, which we know because Alliant has their proposal out there for wind, but clearly solar is also going to be, I'll just say, continuing to see more of that in Iowa. And in terms of, I'll just say some of the skeptics as far as does it work in Iowa? Yes, it works in Iowa. In fact, Iowa is one of the better states, number 16, by the way, as far as an overall solar resource availability.
So let me make sure I have this right. And Waylon and Steve and Nick, you can fact check me on this here. If I remember right, I was at about 67 or 70% of their energy from renewable sources. Is that about right now?
Yep.
Yep.
Have set the goal of having 100% of Iowa's energy coming from renewable sources by 2050 or earlier, and whether that still is realistic or not. And what are the challenges ahead to this big spurt of growth we've seen? It has to do with policy, siting policy, tariffs, incentives, federal and state incentives, et cetera. I just wonder if, Waylon, if you could lead us on that conversation about kind of what do you see as the challenges that Iowa faces in terms of continuing to grow its renewable energy sources?
Sure, I'd love to. So as you look at the lay of the land in Iowa, and Steve, I'm going to take us a step backwards again because I think that history matters. Coming out of the farm crisis, late 80s, early 90s, was when we really started to first see wind come into Iowa, and it was one of the things that helped a lot of farmers be able to stay operational, gave them the opportunity to diversify their operation. And at that time, at the local level, the conversation was more, when are we going to see a project? When will we see a development in our county? We'd like to see one in our county. You fast forward till now, where the permitting is still majorly done at the county level. The conversation has really shifted to more of an opposition to seeing the development. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face going forward is how do we site projects and get the steel in the ground at the end of the day. I think that there's going to be opportunity for continued conversations at the state level to talk about shifting to a statewide standard for siting, which would bring efficiency and stability and predictability for not just developers, but also residents of communities and for county government to know what they can expect, how these projects should be and could be built. you're going to see that. I believe you'll see that for both wind, solar, and probably battery storage, which is the third leg of the stool when we really start talking about renewables and how they help stabilize the grid. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we're going to see going forward is how do we answer that question? How should they be sited? And then, as we continue to have that conversation, what does it mean for our local communities? One of the biggest topics that's being discussed right now at the Iowa Capitol is property taxes. We hear that's one thing that you hear a lot is my property taxes continue to go up and my property taxes are too high. Well, I think the fundamental question is going to have to be answered as well. That is really simple. How do we allow projects to happen and lower property taxes that are sustainable and not have barriers being put up at the county level? I believe that's where the conversation is going to be at the state capitol going forward, is striking that balance.
I do want to talk more in depth about siting, because I think that is one of the big obstacles that the industry faces coming up. And we'll get to that a little bit later, because I think that's probably worth a full Iowa Idea session just by itself. So I do want to touch on that as much as we can. So obviously siting and that question about what's in it for communities is an important question as well. But I know Steve also mentioned the this kind of flurry of activity going on right now, where like Mid-American, I think last month was approved for 800 megawatts of solar capacity that would power about somewhere around $144,000 homes. And Alliant also has a wind energy project for 1,000 megawatts over 2 years. And I think they expect to hear some movement from the IUC, Iowa Utilities Commission, on that by the first quarter of next year. So those are both in the pipeline. And it kind of leads me to another obstacle I see happening, which is that both of these projects are obviously they're attempts to get incentives before they expire. And under the previous law, renewable energy projects had into the, I think, 2030 to get off the ground. And now under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that's been advanced. And so they either have to come online by, I want to say 2027, or have substantial progress by 2027. So it seems like these are this big burst of projects going on right now. The big question is what is coming down the pike after that. You also mentioned that solar is going to probably see some kind of a growth. And Nick, I want to talk to you about this, because I think most of our conversation will probably talk about wind energy and utility grade solar installations. But Nick, the Iowa Utilities Commission this summer has opened up a conversation about demand and response, and aggregating individual businesses and homes that have solar installations or batteries. Nick, do you want to talk to us at all about, or share with us kind of why that's important and what that might mean for the future of individual solar growth?
Yeah, well, first, Craig, Waylon, Steve, great to be here. It's really exciting. Iowa, just to throw a few things known about Iowa out there, kind of known as the state in the country to look to if you want to integrate a lot of new renewables and keep costs down. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. But those conditions that kind of led to where Iowa is today are significantly changing. I'll give you a good example. One thing that Iowa is known for is kind of being a national leader in wind deployment, but you're also quickly being known for another thing. Right now, Iowa is number 3 in the country for having the most of your portion of your energy production going to artificial intelligence data centers. Currently, if you look, Bloomberg just released a report yesterday. Currently, 18% of all electricity used in Iowa is not used by people. It's used by large data centers. And so the question becomes, in this new context of kind of like growing electricity load, and in the context of a grid, which is essentially a dumb grid, which means we don't have a lot of mechanisms to pair the way we use energy with the way we supply energy. Kind of like to Steve's point, solar and wind tend to balance each other out and kind of like even out the production. But when you look at the energy use profiles on any given day, you'll see this kind of like curve of energy use with peak energy use in the late afternoon. Well, there is and has been for over 20 years a method to kind of match that use in the United States called demand response. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission advanced an order that kind of nationally recognized the term negawatt, which is, could we be paid the same for a megawatt of energy reduction as we pay for an megawatt of energy production, because the net effect is the same. And we know that energy efficiency, solar and wind are the cheapest sources on the grid, but energy efficiency is actually the cheapest source, the energy we don't use. And so states and utilities across the country have kind of created a system of demand response. Can we respond to times of high grid costs, high peak times, by reducing the demand, and can ratepayers be paid for that? And so, as you mentioned, Craig, the Iowa Utilities Board now has opened an investigation to see if Iowa should participate in a competitive demand response market. We litigated in Wisconsin to open up that market, and it's pretty extraordinary, kind of the response from industrial and commercial customers with this open market to say, like, yes, we will participate and we gladly reduce our electric bills and be good grid customers. I think embedded in that conversation, you bring up kind of distributed solar, like solar that I might own, whether I'm a farmer or a business or a municipality or school or hospital or whoever. It's connected to my meter that's reducing electricity use at the point of use. And I think when you look at this growing kind of, I would say undefined, but kind of scary growth in electricity use, and at the same time, as you mentioned, Craig, this kind of rollback of investment and promotion and incentives in the quickest to build energy sources, which are solar and wind, the question becomes, how can a state like Iowa, being now a leader, and I'll just put a bookmark here and say, there's a reason that Iowa's number 3 in AI data center use of your electricity, and that's because your power prices have been low. And that's the key metric to build energy intensive kind of uses, is look for low power prices. But what ends up happening? Power prices go up. And so I think the balance at the regulatory body is to say, okay, are we going to spread these electricity costs for these new kind of like very influential investors and high energy users? Are we going to spread those along through residential ratepayers and commercial ratepayers? Who will pay for this? Will we make them pay for it? And what steps can we take to blunt the sharp edge of all of a sudden 25% of our electricity use is now used for data centers? And I'll end with one point just to kind of put in perspective how energy intensive these facilities are and how they're increasing. A big solar farm, not only 5 years ago, was say 20 megawatts. You just said 800 megawatts. And my county here in Wisconsin, we have a 1.2 gigawatt farm. Well, the newest data center that's under construction in the United States is for Meta. It's being built in Louisiana. It is the size of Manhattan. And when it's completed, it will use 3 times more electricity than the city of New Orleans each year. And so I think this idea of how we use electricity and how we think about electricity is fundamentally changing, and demand response is an answer to that.
Thank you, Nick. You mentioned a number of things here that I want to follow up on. One is just by the comparison of what does megawatt mean, and I just find it interesting that we talk about Alliant just got approved, or Mid American just got approved for that 800 megawatt thing. For perspective, the now decommissioned Duane Arnold nuclear plant near Palo is about 600 megawatts or 640 megawatts. So, and that's pretty small for a nuclear reactor. But in terms of comparison, the recently approved Mid-American thing project will have a larger output than the old decommissioned nuclear plant did. So obviously we're looking at demand response and how that might influence the growth of solar. And let's say that Nick, would the decision from the Utilities Commission, I guess that's my question, would it have an effect on how solar grows in the state? If the Utilities Commission says, we don't want to go down that path, we're going to keep the rules just what they are, does that stifle the growth, or does it? I don't know what effect that would have.
There's not necessarily a direct correlation. The policies that really enable distributed solar growth are net metering, where a customer can interconnect to the utility and reduce their electricity bill at the same rate that they pay. That's the most stable economics. The residential industry, unlike the commercial industry, the tax credit for residential is done on December 31st. So the question next year is, will there be a competitive market for customer-owned generation that actually contributes to reducing the electricity use? And that really is a decision for the Iowa Utilities Board with all the utilities to say, how are we treating interconnected customers? When it comes to demand response is the first step towards virtual power plants. So that is when you can bulk connect energy storage, paired with solar or not, to deliver voltage regulation and peak load power on demand to the grid to reduce use. And interestingly, just a few weeks ago, there was a test in California where they bulk connected 100,000 customer-owned energy storage devices to deliver to the grid, and it's super impressive. The economic case is compelling because these are investments. If a utility invests in a wind farm or a transmission line or a nuclear plant, every single ratepayer pays back the cost of that plant plus a protected rate of return to the utility. The more expensive the plant, the more we pay back. That's how our rates are set. When I put solar on my house, or when a city puts solar on their facility, no ratepayer has to pay that back. And so the Utilities Board has a responsibility to say, what is the value of these assets? How will they contribute in this market? And what I will say as a motivation for a lot of customers is, we have lived in this myth that electricity doesn't matter. I go around the Midwest and talk to all kinds of groups, professionals, local community groups, and I always ask, raise your hand if you know how much you pay for kilowatt of electricity. It doesn't matter the group. The percentage is always 1 to 2%, and usually it's a farmer that knows. Shout out to Waylon up there. Farmers are intelligent about most things. And that age is coming to an end. Everybody very soon is going to be paying attention to electricity bills because they're going up. That is an incentive also for demand response. As prices go up, it's an incentive for time of use rates. It's an incentive for solar adoption. It's an incentive for energy storage adoption. It's an incentive for demand response. So this is kind of the next age of utility rate making, really, is to say, how are we empowering customers to save electricity, to reduce electricity price increases for all of us?
That's a good question. And that also brings up another challenge we have before us for growth of renewable energy. And Steve, we've seen, I think, more or less 2 decades worth of national electrical use demand being essentially static. And then all of a sudden now it's taking off like a rocket. And what's driving that is the data centers and the increased reliance on AI. There's some other factors as well, but I think by far the big driver is data centers. And of course, we have several of those in Iowa, including 2 being built right now in Southwest Cedar Rapids, which is a major construction site if you've ever driven through there. But with that, there's a lot of speculation that rates are going to go up. Steve, I just wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about kind of the what's expected to happen with electricity availability and rates.
Sure. So I'll tag on to basically your aspect in terms of growth. And yes, I mean, we're looking at the next 20 years of seeing some unprecedented growth, not just Iowa, but nationally. Some industrial, but yes, a lot of that is AI. So when MISO has modeled this for Iowa, and by the way, last year we were just shy of 70 terawatt hours of consumption in the state. We're looking at 30 to 60% growth in the next 20 years. That is a tremendous amount of energy and a tremendous amount of potential, I'll just say, additions to our generation system.
Steve, real quick, when you say growth, what do you mean by growth? Is that demand, or what do you mean by growth?
It's load. It's consumption. Load.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yep. Although I will come back to pointing out that there's really 2 components to electricity. There's the energy and there's capacity. And capacity is also playing a factor in what we're actually seeing now, and the need to, for instance, put in the solar and the wind. In fact, I'll address that right now. So when Mid-American and Alliant have looked at this, because MISO has redone the way it looks at accredited capacity, suddenly both utilities find themselves capacity short. And so to bolster up that capacity that they have to meet, the wind and the solar right now is the quickest form of energy they can get online. If they look at, and they both have proposals for gas plants out there, but gas plants right now, we're looking at lead times of minimum 4 years. So to meet that capacity requirement, they're really trying to just put things in place as quick as they can. Otherwise, you end up with penalties. But if we look at basically, I'm going to harken back to your comment on the big, beautiful bill, by the way. They are obviously both trying to see if they can secure the credits. To do that, by the way, they will need to start construction by January 4th of 2026. And then the definition of start of construction has been modified too now. So it means if they secure a contract, basically for wind turbine blades or turbines or whatever, that will actually then qualify for start of construction. And then they'll have 4 to 5 years. So it's basically the end of the 20s. They'll have to actually get it operational to qualify for the credit. And so I'm sure both of them are very actively trying to do that. I will point out, in both of their cases, I think the facilities, I know this for Mid-American, they will build it regardless, just because they have that instant need for that capacity. But yes, in terms of growth, a lot of challenges. How do we meet that projected upcoming growth? Back to the aspect of who pays for that growth. Some of the things we're seeing right now in other states. In fact, just this morning I was reading that Ohio that has taken an approach basically to redo the tariff that the data centers basically enter into. And I'll refer it back to an somewhat old concept, but it's really a take or pay. So they're requiring them to pay for 85% of the contracted energy, whether they use it or not. And so as a result of that tariff, they've actually seen a reduction from, I think it was from 30 gigawatts to 18 gigawatts of energy projected, or basically generation projections. So many states are seeing that. Minnesota and others are seeing this concept, trying to say, well, bring your own energy. I mean, all of that will play as to how much the utilities have to actually meet to meet that demand growth. So a lot of challenges, not the least of which is, and we haven't talked about much, but transmission. Transmission sort of really is vital to basically meeting our overall demand growth. Cost effectively, I say.
Yeah. I should note, just for viewers keeping score, MISO stands for Midwestern Independent System Operators. Is that right? That's the organization that runs the grid in the Midwest, the electrical transmission grid. Just for people keeping score about what that means. I think that energy policy has its own jargon and vernacular, and it's hard to keep track of all these different acronyms. So that's one of them. I want to pick up a little bit on. I do want to talk about siting and the siting discussion more in depth here in a minute. But first, let me just kind of do a round robin of our panelists here. When you look at siting and you look at huge increase in demand, you look at technology. Is it realistic still to set this goal of having 100% of the energy in Iowa coming from renewable sources? Is that still something we should aim for, or is that kind of pie in the sky? Who wants to be the first to take that on?
I'll start. My perspective, yes, it is clearly doable. I mean, as we look at the challenges ahead, I mean, again, all the things I'll just repeat. I mean, we don't have to have it all in Iowa, but we have to have the ability to get it to Iowa. And so, I mean, we know that renewables will always be the lowest cost form of energy. It will hands down beat any other form. Why? No fuel cost. And so that has the advantage as we look at the ability to bring that energy to Iowa. We can either export it or we can import it, and that'll keep costs low for everyone. Is it doable? Yes. Do we need more storage? Yes. As we look, I'll just say, towards future projections of, fossil free, certainly we all know that nuclear is currently on the table. That is certainly the possibility, but is it 100%, I'll just say carbon free? Yes, that's certainly doable.
I should mention that I think people who are following this know this, but there is a proposal from Nexstar Energy, which owns the Duane Arnold decommissioned Duane Arnold site, to restart it, and they're in the process of that right now. They have been vague on whether that would just go to the data centers or whether that go to the grid in general. And it's not clear where that would go, but they obviously see a big spike in demand that in this area that they need to address in some way, shape, or form. So that nuclear plant, Iowa's only nuclear plant, was set to decommission, but closed a bit early when it was damaged in the derecho. But it's still more or less there. And so they are certainly taking the steps to reactivate it at some point. And I don't think they've said for sure that they will do it, but they seem to be like 99% of the way there. So that's in the background as well. I do want to talk about something that Waylon brought up, because the siting process. And it's true that the growth that Iowa has seen so far in renewable energy has been mostly at the county level in terms of siting. Waylon, do you expect that the legislature will actually take up or propose some kind of system where the state would take over the siting instead of the local officials?
Yeah, I think that I think there's an opportunity there for it to be a serious part of the conversation when we bring all this together, looking at how do we meet the demand of the future, how do we, how do we make sure that we have the reliability and the efficiency of building out. I think it has to be part of the conversation. When we have projects in an industry that has an impact far beyond county lines, we have to look at how does this benefit the state, and how does it impact the region overall. I mean, when we look at siting, it's not just the state of Iowa that's impacted by it. When we're looking at how much energy we're exporting out of our state and what that means. So yeah, have the state having a larger involvement in it going forward, I think is going to be crucial in order to be able to meet the future demand, the future growth that we need in order to be able to ensure that everybody gets the electrons that they need to simply power from powering their house to running the data centers.
Now, Waylon, you have wind turbines on your property, is that right?
I do, yes.
But there are some counties, I think you said there are something like 50 of Iowa's 99 counties that have some kind of regulation that make it harder to develop, or downright impossible in some cases, to develop a wind energy or a utility grade installations. And obviously they vary. But I know that in Lynn County, a couple of years ago, we had the proposals to develop a Duane Arnold 1 and 2 solar plant outside of the Duane, decommissioned solar or nuclear plant, and then also a solar utility grade solar project near Hagen. And hundreds of people showed up to our county supervisors meetings on that. And I hear what you're saying about, this is a bigger issue than this on the county level, but certainly you have to expect that there would be some kind of a hue and cry from local officials and some landowners about moving a local decision to the state.
Oh, of course, it's time old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a time old battle, no doubt about it. I mean, you're getting into the philosophical local control and where should these decisions be made. I've always believed that, being able to make a decision at the level of government closest to the people that is that is confident and competent in making those decisions is the right place to have it. But yet, on the same token, we have to look to the future. And if we don't look at what's going to be the most efficient way to permit projects in order to be able to meet the demand of the future, then we're only hurting ourselves. And we really also need to look at what do these projects mean for the local communities, and how do you strike that balance? And if you want to look at wind alone in Adair County, they are 30% of the valuable tax base in that county. When you start talking property taxes, that's roads, bridges, dollars to their schools, their EMS services, all the services that people expect to be able to have from their government. The money to fund that has to come from somewhere, and renewable energy is a huge player at the local level in contributing to that and being able to provide those services. A lot of times it's what happens behind the scenes is equally as important as to what you actually see. And the revenue generation off of renewables is huge for the state of Iowa.
The AP reported, Associated Press reported last year, and other people reported this also, that in some counties in the Midwest, renewable energy companies are the biggest taxpayers in the county. And they have examples where a school was struggling, and all of a sudden somebody steps in, and now they can launch new programs or hire new teachers. And I think that would be welcome news to a lot of counties. How do you foresee, or if you had your wish list, how do you see taxes, property taxes, and state siting? How do those get connected by the legislature? Because is there an overt way of doing that, or is it just a lure out there that says, hey, if we cite a project in your county, this is the benefit you would have? How do those two things get connected? Because last year the legislature did talk about a property tax reform, and there were several proposals. And the time ran out of the session. They're definitely going to bring it up again this year. How do those two things get linked, or do legislators link the property tax conversation with the solar siting or the renewable energy siting conversation?
I believe they're starting to link it more. And a lot of times that's through education, being able to show them the actual numbers of this is what it means to X county, or this is what it means to the state as a whole. And that's a lot of the work that we've been doing over the interim and also during last session, was to really be able to show the legislators this is the impact that these projects have to your counties at your local levels. And this is why we need to continue to make sure that these projects are a part of the conversations at that local level, and being able to continue to be able to build. If you look at wind is taxed on a replacement tax. There's a replacement tax and it flows back to the county. I could spend hours explaining that to everyone, but know that there's a replacement tax there. Solar is taxed a little bit differently, and I think there's probably an opening for conversations on how that looks going forward as we continue the conversations on how you actually offer property tax relief. And part of offering property tax relief is to ensure that the base, or the amount of people or companies paying into property taxes, grows. You can't stifle who's paying in and expect to be able to have the same services going forward. I mean, the math doesn't work.
Waylon, obviously you're in touch with people still in the legislature. What is the current thinking if this state siting process does come up? What might that look like? Would it be something where the legislature itself is deciding where to cite things, or would it be something for the Utilities Commission to take up, or how would that?
So currently,
that would work.
It would probably, the most likely outcome would be that it falls with the Utilities Commission. It could be to where a lot in other places that the county's evaluating, making sure that the laid out project does indeed meet certain criteria and check marks, and then they pass it on for final approval to the IUC. That's the way I would envision it. Currently, there's actually a process laid out in code where a project could be cited at the state level if the counties are not open to, and that's being challenged, right? That process is being looked at by a few companies now to see if that's a viable pathway. But I do believe, bringing in statewide standards, and when you talk statewide standards, you're creating a unified platform. Maybe it's on decibel levels, on setbacks, on a various different things that are concerns for folks.
And I have to ask this question because it's so much of the topic of conversation these days in Iowa about eminent domain. As far as I know, and Waylon and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but on the take wind energy projects right now, I don't think any of them have used eminent domain, right? It's the voluntary easements with the
correct. 100% of easements are voluntary when you start looking at wind and solar battery storage. The developers do not have the authority to utilize eminent domain, nor do they really want to tell you the truth. The only time when you're talking about the electrical grid where eminent domain comes into play is when we start talking about transmission lines. Mm-hmm. But it's a completely different code chapter that addresses that.
So in terms of if the state does go with some kind of a statewide siting process with the benchmarks you talked about, that would not, you don't think that would probably have eminent domain as being a power? It would be still voluntary? Same with
It'd
the
still
ones-
be voluntary. That's not what the industry is. That's not what the industry is asking for. What the industry is asking for is allow us to be able to go out and talk to the landowners and let us make agreements with them on one-on-one levels, but allow us the opportunity to build. Don't don't artificially put roadblocks in the way that disallow for future expansion, that disallow for future growth to meet the needs.
Well, do you think that conversation is going to come up in the next legislature starting in January?
I believe it will.
That's interesting. Something else to watch out for. Let me also talk about some other things. And we talked about siting. We talked about the federal regulations affecting growth. Are there other things out there that affect growth in one way or the other, like technology, for instance? I know that when we talk about some of these counties that are passing regulations that make it difficult to build renewable energy projects, it's where was I going with this? It's because I'm trying to. Now I've lost my track of mind thought of where I was going with this. But in terms of technology, is that something that works for or against the growth of renewable energy? Where I was going with this, now that I remember. So much of the opposition about wind projects and solar projects has been that we're taking farmland to do solar instead, or do wind energy instead, or taking valuable farmland away. But I know there's some technology out there that might seek to address that, and I think there's also an argument out there that just addresses the period even without technology. I just wonder if any of our panelists can talk about the role of technology and what that might mean to the growth of renewable energy in Iowa.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Okay,
I think the first thing to know is there's no silver bullet here, and we exist in I would say like a low information space about what's actually happening. So maybe let's work backwards. We talked about nuclear. You can actually see here lots of information about small modular reactors, thorium reactors, new breeds of reactors. But when you actually look, what you see is, okay, Bill Gates funded project has just kind of like launched this prospect in Kansas for potential interconnection in 2038. So I don't know if you're counting, but that's a long ways away for a prospective nuclear project. If you look at natural gas projects, you're looking at a minimum 5-year lead time for the turbine itself. And the pressures, really, the investment pressures on the natural gas industry are LNG exports, because that's where the money is. So just a quick thought experiment. You create an export market for U.S. natural gas, knowing that the export market in Europe, gas is minimum 3 times as expensive. What happens to gas prices in the United States? I'll tell you, they don't go down. Yeah. They go up to meet a global commodity price. So what are we left with then? Reopening old nuclear plants, if it's safe to do so, not a bad idea. Solar and wind development. So the real questions come down to what are the technology innovations in solar and wind? Wind turbines are getting bigger and more productive. Solar is getting easier to build big and cheap. There is some integration. They're all bifacial, so there's good integration with pollinator planting, good integration with grazing of certain types of animals, unfortunately not so much cattle. And some innovations are needed in this kind of large, capital-intensive, calcified industry we call agriculture, large, capital-intensive, calcified industry we call energy. where is the sweet spot there so that we can have our cake and eat it too. Nothing is stopping that except for innovation. There's no technology roadblocks. What I'll say that big technology is that people need to look out for is, for example, you've probably heard, if you follow politics, during this kind of like last and post-election cycle, lots of conversations about Spain and Portugal. Oh, if we put in renewables, we're going to have blackouts like they did in Spain. That is, in essence, a market and technology problem. Spain isn't the United States. They're dependent on Russian oil and natural gas. They have no other choice. They are a highly dense population. They can't build energy generation fast enough. They're stuck with solar and wind. And the challenge there is that inverter-based technologies are grid-following technologies. If you think about an inverter, what it's doing is it's syncing its interconnection frequency to the frequency of the grid. And when that frequency, grid frequency, is not there, the grid goes down, the asset shuts down. It has a rapid shutdown process. But it's following that frequency. So all of a sudden, if you get a high penetration rate of inverter-based resources like wind and solar, they start to follow that grid frequency and can follow it into a point where they become the major generating asset and actually deviate the frequency to a point where the grid equipment can't handle it and you get a blackout. So the technology innovation there is grid forming inverters and long duration storage, where you can have hard base load renewable assets that create a base load power for the grid. And so as we see more of this long duration storage and grid forming inverters coming online, you're going to see much more kind of like durable and rapid penetration of renewables as baseload grid assets.
Interesting.
Craig,
Steve, I was going to say, Steve, I was going to call you anyway, but go ahead.
I'm going to address that slightly differently because yes, technology will change, and yes, grid forming is definitely on its way. Batteries will help. But if we look at this from a perspective of what production do I get per acre, and look at this as an aspect of overall land consumption. The stat I always like to use is that there are studies out there that show to meet that 100% by 2050, we need 64,000 megawatts of wind, 46,000 megawatts of solar. That would do it for us. If we take the land that actually occupies in Iowa, that represents roughly 1% of our overall ag land. So, I mean, to some extent, that's really the crux of this. You know, are we overreacting to the aspect of taking away land, trying to meet a valuable need society has? So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you that very question about taking away farmland. Because I think you have mentioned before that that we grow more crops than we actually need, and I just wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, if we equate this to energy, I mean, 50% of our corn crop is actually utilized for ethanol, just another form of energy. And so, I mean, it really comes down to a balance of which energy source are we actually trying to look to basically use the land for. We have a need for electricity. So to me, it's, not an aspect of taking it out of production. It's just what am I producing from that land?
And I guess I can put a dollar value on that for you. So our two main crops in Iowa are corn and soybeans, two main crops that we grow. The production value per acre of soybeans is $600 on average right now. And that production value per acre for corn is $928. If you take an acre and put it into solar, that value production is $11,068. So, it makes, in all honesty, it makes good economic sense for the landowner, for the farmer, to take part of their operation and turn it into energy production. I mean, with solar, the numbers are there. And when we're looking at a downturn in the farming economy, and when we're looking for ways to attempt to pass on that farm to the next generation, solar should be really get some consideration as to how can I incorporate this into my operation in order to ensure the longevity and in order to ensure that the legacy continues for the next generation.
Interesting. We have about 5 minutes left in our session here. I want to do a round robin just from your perspective about what the future looks like. If we, are we opposed to, or are we up to the meeting the challenges? And is it really doable to reach the 100% renewable energy forecast for the state? I just kind of wonder what your perspectives are about what are the next 10 or 10 or 20 years going to look like in Iowa? Are they going to be a repeat of what we've seen, or is it going to be slowing down or speeding up? Or let me just maybe start with Waylon, and we'll just go around from there.
I think it depends upon what the individuals of Iowa prioritize. Not just what the individuals at the Capitol prioritize, but what the everyday citizen decides that they want to prioritize. Do we want to prioritize moving Iowa forward and ensuring that we have the energy supply that we need, and be able to introduce new technologies, bring new industry to Iowa? If the answer is yes, and if we're willing to move forward, then yeah, the sky's the limit. These goals are definitely attainable. But if we're not willing to adapt, if we're not willing to accept modern technology and what's on the horizon, then we're going to struggle.
Nick, what's your feeling in about what the next 10 to 20 years are going to look like?
Yeah, so there's a bill that just passed in North Carolina, ostensibly related to this rising energy demand from AI. And it passes costs for data centers onto residential ratepayers. It prioritizes data centers for electricity when there is a limited supply. And it rolls back the carbon reduction targets of the state. All the Republicans voted for it. Democratic governor vetoed it. 11 Democrats joined it, passed this bill. This is a future in which 40% of the S&P 500, the value of the S&P 500, comes from the top 10 companies. 9 of those companies are technology AI firms, and 1 is basically a utility investor-owned utility investor, Berkshire Hathaway. In Iowa, I think you may not want this, but you are a test case, because Iowa is known as having a fiercely independent streak. And the question is, can the state of Iowa stand up to large moneyed interests and make rules and investments that benefit the people of Iowa in defense of the electricity prices that you pay, your ability to develop energy on your own site, and to fight against what is inevitable at this point is a very rapid increase in shortage of supply of electricity in the United States. I have faith in the good people of Iowa.
Steve, we have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah. So the spin I'll put on it is utilities themselves. The utilities themselves, I'll just say for decades, have ultimately decided what form of energy we're going to receive. Sure, they need approvals, but the utilities in the state right now are very much in line with basically trying to bring us more renewables. Why? Again, lower cost. The test case we talked about in Iowa is proven out. I mean, it has kept our costs lower in the state due to the amount of renewables we have. Do I think that will continue? Yeah, I do. Do I think that basically ultimately we have the ability to do 100%? Yes, I do. Ultimately, all back to the simple principle that it's lower cost. And that's what the utilities are there for. They're there to basically ensure reasonable cost to the customer. Sure, they're there to obviously make money and a profit. But that too, no matter what resource we build, that's true. It just comes down to what is the lowest cost resource we can actually put in place.
Thank you, panelists, for being with us and having this conversation today. This is important for moving Iowa forward. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day. We're all busy to to have the conversation with us. And I especially want to thank our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for Iowa Ideas and keeping this free for everybody to participate in. Iowa Ideas continues tomorrow with a keynote speaker in the morning from the New York Times bestseller from Iowa, and the founder of the Big Grove Brewery in Solon and a partner in the Big Grove Brewery in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids. So those will all be interesting to tune into. Thank you very much. Good day, everybody.